He's been gone 6 years, Tom said, his eyes already drifting past me to the girl gripping his hand, her blonde hair catching the afternoon sun. We stood by the rusty swings in the park, the scent of damp earth thick in the air. It's time you moved on, Sarah. His casual dismissal cracked something inside me, leaving me exposed under the harsh Midwestern sky. The fluorescent lights of the grocery store hummed a steady tune above Clara Jensen as she pushed her cart down the cereal aisle. She stopped, eyes catching on a familiar figure examining a bag of potatoes. Tom Miller. 6 years. He hadn't changed much, maybe a bit more around the middle, a few deeper lines etched near his eyes. He still wore that same faded blue work shirt. Clara paused, considering. She couldn't very well ignore him, not in a town this small. He looked up then, meeting her gaze, and gave a tight, almost imperceptible nod. She returned it, a practiced half-smile. Later at the checkout, Clara found herself behind Carol Hayes. "You won't believe who I just saw, Carol," Clara said, leaning in slightly as the cashier scanned a carton of milk. Carol, ever ready for local news, raised an eyebrow. "Oh, who's that?" "Tom Miller, he's back in town." A quiet gasp escaped Carol's lips. She looked toward the automatic doors as if expecting him to walk through. "Tom, well, I never, after all this time." That evening, the sun setting in streaks of orange and purple over the cornfields, Carol brought the news home. Sarah stood by the open refrigerator, putting away the day's groceries. A bag of frozen peas, a carton of orange juice. The scent of last night's pot roast lingered in the air. "Clara Jensen saw him," Carol announced, her voice flat as she placed a tin of peaches on the counter. "Tom." Sarah paused, the bag of peas cold against her fingers. "Tom," she repeated, a question more than a statement. She hadn't heard that name spoken aloud in so long. "Yes, Tom, your husband, or ex-husband, I suppose." Carol's words hung in the silence of the kitchen. Sarah slowly closed the freezer door. "I never filed," she said, her voice quiet. "He was the one who left." She turned, leaning against the counter, her gaze fixed on a small chip in the laminate. Carol sighed, a sound that carried years of unspoken criticism. "You can't still love him, can you? After 6 years of silence. Not a letter, not a call, nothing." She shook her head, picking up a stray crumb from the counter. "I make my own decisions, Mom," Sarah replied, her voice firmer now. She felt a familiar knot tighten in her stomach. Her independence had become her shield, worn thin in places, but still standing. She had built a life, a quiet one, but it was hers. "Well, he must have had a girlfriend," Carol mused, her eyes distant, already constructing a narrative. "That's usually how it goes. Men don't just up and leave a perfectly good marriage unless there's someone else involved." Sarah pushed herself off the counter. "No," she said, her denial quick and automatic. "Tom would never cheat. He's not like that." The words felt true, a conviction she had held on to all this time, even in his absence. Tom was many things, but a deceiver, a cheater? No. That night, sleep eluded Sarah. The image of Tom, seen only through Clara's brief description, played in her mind. His work shirt, the lines by his eyes. The quiet house felt too large, the silence too loud. She turned over, pulling the quilt tighter, the heavy fabric doing little to ease the cold ache in her chest. She thought about their last argument, small and senseless, escalating into something irreparable. I ruined everything, she thought. The old regret, a familiar weight. 2 days later, Emily Hayes, Sarah's younger sister, returned home. Emily, fresh from her journalism internship at the county newspaper, buzzed with news stories. She dropped her duffel bag by the coat rack, her usually neat blonde hair a little wild from the drive. "You wouldn't believe what I saw today," Emily began, already heading for the kitchen. "Guess who's back in town?" She poured herself a glass of iced tea, oblivious to the quiet tension in the room. "I saw your husband today, Zara." Zara, who had been reading a magazine at the kitchen table, felt her breath catch. Emily said it so casually, as if mentioning a neighbor's new pet. Carol, however, was not so calm. "Tom, what did he look like? Has he gotten fat and lost all his hair? Did he look like a broken man?" Her questions tumbled out, rapid fire. Emily took a long swallow of tea. Well, she started, wiping her mouth with the back of her hand. He looks completely ragged, actually, like he's been working construction for 6 years straight, which he probably has been. She paused, considering. But still, he sort of exudes sex appeal, like he could still charm the pants off anyone he wanted. Sarah gripped the edge of the table, her knuckles white, ragged but still charming. It sounded like him. And get this, Emily continued, oblivious to Sarah's rigid posture. He was with a girl, said it was his daughter. Maggie, I think she said her name was. About 12 or 13. The world seemed to tilt. Sarah felt a cold dread spread through her veins, freezing her from the inside out. Her mind raced, struggling to process the implications of Emily's words. Daughter. That's why he left, Carol exclaimed, slamming her hand on the counter, the sound sharp in the sudden silence. He got some girl pregnant. That's it, plain and simple. Her voice was loud, accusing, filling the kitchen with its judgment. Sarah, though, could only manage a whisper. Her voice felt foreign, detached. Does Maggie have dark hair? She asked, her eyes fixed on Emily. Tom's hair had been dark, almost black. Emily frowned slightly, recalling. No, she said, shaking her head. She's a stunning blonde. The afternoon sun streamed through the passenger window of Tom's pickup truck, highlighting the dust motes dancing in the air. Maggie, buckled into the seat beside him, picked at a loose thread on her jeans. They were on their way to Tom's mother's house, the fields blurring past in a familiar rhythm. That pretty girl at the media group today, Maggie started, her voice thoughtful. The one who kept looking at you. She couldn't take her eyes off you. Tom kept his gaze on the road, a faint smile playing on his lips. That was Emily, my ex-wife's sister, Sarah. He hadn't thought about Emily in years. Funny how some faces stayed sharp in memory, others faded to indistinct blurs. Emily had been a whirlwind, even then. Maggie turned in her seat to face him fully. Was Sarah as pretty as her? He paused, a beat too long. The memories, 6 years old, were still clear. She was even more beautiful, he said, the words quiet, almost a confession. Maggie studied his profile, her brow furrowed. You really loved her, didn't you? So why did she cheat on you? The question was direct, unburdened by the years of unspoken grief that surrounded his past. Tom's hands tightened on the steering wheel. The silence stretched, filled only by the hum of the tires on asphalt. He looked at Maggie, her earnest face, and knew she deserved the truth, or as much of it as he could give her. Yes, he finally said, his voice low. She did. He watched the fence posts flash by. It's why we broke up. Please don't tell anyone. Maggie nodded, absorbing the information with a solemn understanding beyond her years. She reached across the console, her small hand covering his for a moment. I'm glad she cheated then, she said, her voice soft. Because if she hadn't, you wouldn't have met David, and David wouldn't have found you for me. Tom's throat tightened. David. He closed his eyes for a moment, a wave of familiar grief washing over him. David, Maggie's biological father, his best friend, gone too soon. David, who had asked him in those last weeks to look after Maggie, to adopt her. He was a good man, David, Tom managed, his voice thick. The best. He told me to call you Daddy before he went, Maggie whispered, pulling her hand back. And I love you like a real father. Tom felt a warmth spread through him, a counterpoint to the old ache. He remembered David's insistence on the paperwork, the urgency in his fading eyes. Make sure it's done, Tom. Before it's too late. She needs you. And Tom had promised, kept that promise, holding Maggie through the funeral, the endless, empty days that followed. But, Maggie began, a new worry creasing her brow. If you're still married to Sarah, how can you ever find a new mom? Maybe we should meet Sarah and ask her if she's divorced. Tom shook his head immediately. No, Maggie, we can't do that. The thought of confronting Sarah, of dragging Maggie into that old mess, was repugnant. The adoption paperwork, it shows I was married at the time. It could complicate things. He wasn't sure how, precisely, but he knew it was a risk he wouldn't take. His priority was Maggie, always. You will always be my daughter, he said, his voice firm, leaving no room for doubt. Your children will be my grandchildren. End of discussion. Maggie leaned against him, wrapping her arms around his middle as best she could in the truck seat. He felt her small body relax into his, a comfort that spoke of past losses and a newfound security. He hugged her back, pressing a kiss to the top of her blonde head. Later, at his mother Martha's house, as Martha bustled about the kitchen, Tom found a quiet moment to speak with her. "Mom," he said, leaning against the doorframe, "I don't want to talk about Sarah or her family. Not with me, not with Maggie." He met her gaze, making sure his words were clear, unyielding. Martha paused, a spatula in her hand. She looked at him, her usual desire for gossip giving way to something softer, more understanding. "All right, son," she said, nodding slowly. "I understand. I won't mention a thing." It was a surprising concession, and Tom felt a small weight lift from his shoulders. A few minutes later, while Martha was helping Maggie unpack her small overnight bag in the guest room, Tom heard Maggie's voice, hushed but clear. "Grandma Martha, is Sarah really as pretty as Emily?" Martha's reply was equally soft, a gentle whisper. "Oh, honey, she was. Very pretty. And capable, too, despite everything." The landline phone, a beige relic on the kitchen wall, felt heavier than usual in Sarah's hand. She dialed Tom's old number, the one she still remembered, a phantom limb of their past. It rang 3, 4, 5 times before clicking into a generic voicemail message. "The person you are trying to reach is unavailable." Not his voice, not anymore. She tried the number Martha had for him, the new one Emily found through a quick search. Same result. A knot of anxiety twisted in her stomach, mingling with a flicker of stubborn hope. She hung up, the silence of the kitchen amplifying her frustration. "You really need to just move on, honey," Carol said, pouring herself another cup of coffee. "There's Greg Harrison, the lumberyard owner. He's a good, steady man. Reliable. You're still young, you need a reliable man." Carol had been pushing the idea of Greg for weeks, ever since Tom's name first surfaced. Sarah just hummed noncommittally. She saw Greg at church, at the grocery store, and always managed to duck away before he could corner her. The thought of dating felt like a betrayal, even to a past that was 6 years dead. How could she move on when the past had just walked back into town, a blonde daughter in tow? "Something's not right about all this, Sarah," Emily said one afternoon, finding Sarah staring out the kitchen window at the bare branches of the oak tree. Emily, usually quick with a teasing remark, her eyes sharp with journalistic curiosity, had softened since the Maggie revelation. "Tom leaving like that, then coming back with a kid no one knew about. And you're so sure he didn't cheat. It just doesn't sit right." Meanwhile, Maggie had started at Stone Ridge Elementary. She was a whirlwind of energy, making friends with an ease that belied her past. On the playground, her athletic grace drew attention, whether chasing a soccer ball or scaling the monkey bars. Her teachers praised her quick mind, her infectious enthusiasm. Tom watched her, a constant, quiet presence at school pickups and parent meetings, a fierce protectiveness in his eyes. He knew her past trauma, the loss of her biological father, the upheaval of moving. He wanted to make this new life as stable as possible. Sarah, unable to help herself, found excuses to drive past the school or the town park. She saw them together, Tom and Maggie, the way Maggie would throw her arms around Tom's neck, the easy conversation between them, the shared laughter. It was a bond forged in something Sarah couldn't touch, something built outside of her world. A pang of raw jealousy, sharp and unexpected, pierced through her. It was followed by a wave of confusion. This man, so clearly devoted to this child, was the same man who had walked away from her, and the same man she adamantly believed incapable of cheating. Tom's construction business, now officially Miller & Son, was thriving. He'd taken on a few bigger projects, local government contracts, and was quickly reestablishing himself in the community. He was everywhere, talking to the mayor, shaking hands with council members, discussing bids with architects. His presence felt undeniable, carving out a new space for himself in a town that had once been solely theirs. "I just don't believe it, Emily," Sarah confided one evening, sipping lukewarm tea. "Tom wouldn't cheat. It doesn't make sense. Not with Maggie being blonde, not after everything." Her voice was low, laced with a desperation Emily hadn't heard before. "He's not like that. He just isn't." Emily listened, her journalist mind already working. She started asking around, subtly at first. A question to a clerk at the hardware store about where Tom had sourced his materials from before he left. A casual inquiry to a former classmate about Tom's reputation back in the day. Small town, small talk. But Emily knew how to read between the lines, how to piece together fragments of information. Martha, Tom's mother, saw Sarah at the grocery store too. She watched her from a distance, pushing her cart down an opposite aisle. Sarah looked thinner, more tired. Martha felt a familiar pull of sympathy, mixed with the fierce loyalty she held for her son. So much happened, she thought, so many secrets. A whisper started making its way through Stone Ridge, a murmur picked up by Emily's keen ear. It wasn't about Tom cheating, not exactly. It was about why Tom had left. A different kind of story, vague and unsettling. It only added to Sarah's growing confusion, layering uncertainty on top of doubt. She kept replaying their last argument, the one before he walked out. The details were a blur, a haze of anger and hurt. She remembered shouting. He remembered him saying something sharp, something that cut deep. But what? The specifics eluded her, replaced by a dull ache of memory that made her question her own recollections. Had she truly understood what was happening? Later that week, Tom listened as Maggie recounted her day at school, her voice animated, full of newfound joy. And Coach Jenkins said, "I'm already the fastest runner in my class, Daddy," she exclaimed, her eyes bright. Tom smiled, a genuine, easy smile. This new life, this fierce, beautiful daughter, felt right. It felt affirmed. "You need to confront him, honey," Carol repeated, laying a hand on Sarah's arm one Sunday afternoon. "For your own peace of mind. You can't just let this fester." The scent of stale coffee and frying bacon hung heavy in the air of Miller's Diner. Sarah sat in a booth near the window, watching the rain streak down the glass, her heart a frantic drum against her ribs. She'd left a message on his work phone, a blunt request for a meeting. 5 minutes later, he'd called back, his voice neutral. He agreed to meet, but the tone offered no warmth. When Tom walked in, his presence filled the small diner. He wore a faded work jacket, the collar turned up, and his eyes, when they met hers, held no flicker of their shared past, only polite distance. He slid into the opposite side of the booth, his hands resting on the laminated tabletop. "Maggie," Sarah began, cutting straight to it, her voice steadier than she expected. "She's your daughter, Tom." "How?" Tom took a breath, a slight hardening around his jaw. "She is," he confirmed, his gaze drifting to the window. "David, her biological father, he was my best friend. He asked me to adopt her before he passed. It was a promise I made." He kept his story concise, factual. "As for why I left, Sarah, it's in the past." "The past?" Sarah scoffed, a tight, humorless sound. 6 years, Tom. 6 years of silence, and then you show up with a daughter. And you expect me to believe it's in the past?" She leaned forward, her voice dropping. "Did you really think I cheated? Wait." He met her eyes then, and for the first time, a flicker of something raw, something akin to betrayal crossed his face. "I saw it, Sarah," he said, his voice quiet but firm. "With my own eyes, a photo, you and him, in a compromising position. And then your confession." He pushed a hand through his hair, a gesture of old frustration. "I found the picture, and when I confronted you, you just broke. You said it. You said you'd made a mistake." Sarah stared at him, aghast. "What are you talking about? A photo? A confession? Tom, that never happened. That's impossible." Her denial was vehement, born of genuine disbelief. The argument, their last one, had been about other things, petty things, spiraling out of control, but never infidelity. She remembered the haze of tears, the accusations, but not that. Not a picture, not a confession. Meanwhile, Emily, working late at the Stone Ridge Media Group office, was digging. She'd managed to get a hold of Tom's old work records, the dates of his last few projects before he vanished. Cross-referencing them with the local events calendar, something struck her. The timeline of his alleged proof didn't quite line up. A local festival, a major construction deadline Tom had been under, it just didn't fit with the window of opportunity for an affair, let alone a photographic confession. A former co-worker of Tom's, a gruff man named Hank, who now worked in the paper's classified section, recognized a name Emily mentioned while subtly probing. "Suspicious character, you say?" Hank grunted. Reminds me of a guy Tom had trouble with. Little weasel always stirring things up. Name was Doug. Carol, hearing Sarah's shaken account of the diner meeting, felt a cold dread settle in her stomach. A picture, and you said you confessed? She muttered, shaking her head. No, honey. Something's very wrong here. We're going to get to the bottom of this. Her maternal protectiveness, usually expressed as nagging, hardened into a fierce resolve. That evening at Tom's mother's house, Maggie noticed Tom's quiet tension. He was preoccupied, distant, stirring his mashed potatoes without really eating. Daddy, she asked, her voice soft, are you worried about Laura? She caught herself, cheeks flushing. I mean, Sarah. Tom forced a smile, stroking her blonde hair. No, sweetie, our life is good. It's stable. Don't you worry about a thing. But Maggie's innocent slip had landed. Laura. He hadn't thought about Laura in years. A small, unsettling seed of doubt about Sarah's betrayal began to sprout in his mind. Could I have been wrong, he wondered, pushing the thought away almost immediately. Sarah, back in her quiet house, walked from room to room, the weight of Tom's accusations pressing down on her. She tried to replay the last weeks of their marriage, the arguments, the rising tension. The memories were fractured like broken glass. She saw glimpses of anger, of tears, of his retreating back. But the photo, the confession, they simply weren't there. Her mind searched, desperate for a missing piece, a flicker of recognition. Emily's investigation led her to a breakthrough. Doug, the suspicious character Hank mentioned, had a clear motive. He'd been fired by Tom from a major construction project shortly before Tom left, accused of theft and shoddy work. He'd harbored a deep grudge, a desire for revenge. The pieces, though still scattered, were starting to form a disturbing pattern. A fierce resolve solidified in Sarah. This wasn't just about Tom, or Maggie, or their broken past. This was about her own truth, her integrity. I will prove it, she whispered to herself, staring at her reflection in the darkened window. I will prove I never cheated. She recognized the immense burden of Tom's misunderstanding. The years of pain built on a foundation she now knew to be false. Tom, meanwhile, kept his distance, focusing on work, on Maggie. But Sarah's earnest denial, the raw honesty in her eyes, troubled him more than he would ever admit. The image of the confession he held onto so tightly began to fray around the edges. His name is Mark, Emily said, her voice tight with discovery, her laptop screen glowing in the dim light of Sarah's living room. She pushed a printout across the coffee table, a grainy, distorted image, clearly manipulated. Mark Thompson. He used to work for Tom on that church renovation project a few years back, the one where Tom fired him for cutting corners. Sarah remembered Mark, tall, gangly, with an unsettling intensity in his gaze. He'd always lingered a little too long when she dropped off Tom's lunch, his compliments about her cooking bordering on creepy. He always seemed odd, Sarah murmured, a cold prickle of unease running down her spine. Odd doesn't cover it, Emily replied, tapping the screen. He had a crush on you, Sarah. A big one. And he was insanely jealous of Tom. Of his business, of his marriage, of everything. Emily outlined the scheme. Mark had fabricated the confession, a typed note, and doctored a photo, a generic stock image, subtly altered to resemble Sarah with a blurred figure, planning it where Tom would find it. He'd even hinted to Tim in casual conversation about Sarah's supposed wandering eye. Sarah's initial wave of relief, the profound understanding that she hadn't been crazy, that she hadn't betrayed Tom, quickly curdled into a simmering anger. He ruined everything. The words exploded from her, hot and raw. 6 years, 6 years of loneliness, of doubt, of a life unlived, all because of one man's twisted jealousy. Emily arranged a meeting for Tom, presenting him with her findings, the printouts, the inconsistencies, the evidence of Mark's digital forgery. Tom sat across from her, his face a mask of disbelief. No, he said, shaking his head slowly. He wouldn't. Mark. But the evidence was undeniable. The timelines, the details Emily had unearthed, the careful dismantling of his long-held belief. A profound sense of regret, cold and deep, began to settle over him, heavy as a stone. Later, Martha Miller, Tom's mother, found him sitting alone in his truck, staring out at the fields. "It never sat right with me, son," she said, her voice soft, placing a hand on his shoulder. "Sarah and that man. She was always so devoted to you. I always had my doubts." Her words, simple and honest, chipped away at the last vestiges of his misplaced certainty. Maggie, sensing the unspoken tension, watched her father from a distance. He was quieter, his usual easy smile replaced by a somber frown. A shift had occurred, a subtle change she couldn't quite name, but felt acutely. Tom grappled with the enormity of it. 6 years. 6 years of believing a lie, of building a new life on a foundation of pain and misunderstanding. All this time, he whispered to himself, the weight of the lost years pressing down on him. The trust he had so readily given to a deceitful fabrication now felt like a gaping wound. Sarah knew she had to confront Mark. Emily, ever the journalist, insisted on being present, phone recording in her pocket. They found him at the local hardware store, browsing the paint aisle. "Mark," Sarah said, her voice surprisingly calm, "we need to talk about what you did." Mark's eyes darted between Sarah and Emily, a flicker of panic quickly masked by feigned indifference. He tried to deflect, to act surprised, to blame misunderstandings. "I don't know what you're talking about, Sarah," he stammered, his face pale. But Sarah pressed, detailing Emily's findings, his jealousy, his deceit. He finally broke, his denials crumbling into bitter accusations about Tom, about how Tom had always had everything. He was unrepentant, his resentment still burning. Emily discreetly recorded enough to confirm his scheme, a clear admission of his malicious intent. Tom reviewed the evidence from the recording. The voice on the phone, clearly Mark's, his bitter admissions confirming the intricate web of lies he'd spun. His world, built on what he thought was solid ground, was shaken to its core. Carol Hayes, upon hearing the full extent of Mark's treachery, was incandescent with rage. "He deserves to pay for this," she declared, her eyes blazing. 6 years of your life, Sarah. He deserves to pay." She was ready to drive over to the hardware store herself and confront him, a fierce, protective mother ready for battle. Later in Sarah's living room, the quiet hum of the refrigerator the only sound, Sarah and Tom sat opposite each other. The air was thick with unspoken words, with years of pain and misunderstanding. He looked at her, his eyes filled with a grief she hadn't seen in him since his own father died. "Sarah," he began, his voice rough, I am so sorry." The words were hard for him, each one a struggle against the shame and regret that gripped him. He knew an apology wasn't enough, couldn't erase the past, but it was a start. As Tom struggled to find the right words, a heavy silence settled between them. This was where life's costly choices truly unfolded. Stick around to the end to see how life's costly choices unfold. The decision came with a quiet resolve. Tom and Sarah sat in the small, cluttered office of the Stone Ridge Media Group, Emily on the other side of the desk. "We need to clear your name, Sarah," Tom said, his voice firm, meeting Sarah's eyes. She nodded. There was no other way. The truth, ugly as it was, had to come out. Emily, fueled by a journalist's zeal for justice, quickly drafted an article. It outlined Mark Thompson's malicious actions, the forged documents, the doctored photo, his confession. The editor, a gruff but fair man, recognized the gravity of the story. The next morning, the Stone Ridge Sentinel hit the newsstands with a front-page headline: "Local man's deception shatters marriage, rocks community." Mark Thompson, perhaps sensing the impending storm, tried to flee. He was pulled over just outside town, a packed duffel bag in his passenger seat, by a county sheriff's deputy acting on an anonymous tip. The news spread like wildfire. The small town of Stone Ridge, accustomed to quiet lives and predictable rhythms, was abuzz with the scandal. Public opinion, swift and uncompromising, shifted from Sarah to Mark. The whispers and judgmental glances that had followed Sarah for years now turned on him. Maggie, riding her bike past the town square, heard snippets of conversation. Two women on a park bench, their voices low, talking about that Mark Thompson and poor Sarah Jensen. "She never cheated," one said. "It was all a lie." Maggie stopped, her small world tilting on its axis. Not a cheater. The words echoed in her mind. Later she found Tom in the garage fixing a leaky faucet. Daddy, she asked, her voice small, her brow furrowed with confusion. You said Sarah cheated. Was that a lie? Tom stopped, the wrench clattering to the concrete floor. He knelt, taking Maggie's hands in his. He looked into her blue eyes, so like David's, and felt a fresh wave of regret. It was a terrible mistake, sweetheart, he said, his voice thick. I believed a lie. A very bad man made me believe it. Sarah was innocent. She never cheated. He explained the misunderstanding as gently as he could, the heavy weight of his error pressing down on him. I'm so sorry, Maggie, for believing something that wasn't true. Sarah's family rallied around her. Carol, her face pale with remorse, hugged Sarah tightly. I'm so sorry, honey, she whispered, tears in her eyes. I judged you so harshly. I should have known you better. Emily felt a quiet vindication, her journalistic instincts validated. Tom and Sarah met again, not in a diner, but in Sarah's quiet living room. The article lay folded on the coffee table. The conversation was raw, stripped bare of pretense. They talked about the depth of their respective pains, the lost years, the parallel lives they had lived under the shadow of a lie. He spoke of his anger, his sense of betrayal, the difficult journey of raising Maggie as a single father after David's death. She spoke of her loneliness, her bewilderment, the slow erosion of her spirit under the weight of unspoken accusations. The town's reaction continued to be mixed. Some offered sincere apologies, others nodded sympathetically, but a core of ingrained gossip still whispered, finding new angles, new interpretations. Old habits died hard in Stone Ridge. I should have known you better, Sarah, Tom said, his voice quiet, his gaze fixed on a framed photograph of their wedding day, dusty and almost forgotten on a bookshelf. I should have questioned it. I should have come back. That's on my tongue. His apology was heartfelt, acknowledging his part not seeking the truth, in letting a lie fester. Sarah looked at the photo, the younger versions of themselves smiling, oblivious. I should have communicated too, she admitted, her voice soft. I never explained why I didn't pursue the divorce, why I just let it be. She hadn't known how to explain the quiet, stubborn hope she'd harbored, a secret belief that someday, somehow he would come back and they would fix it. Maggie, meanwhile, continued to struggle. The bad stepmother image she'd quietly, subconsciously built for Sarah now crumbled. The new reality, Sarah's innocence, was a complicated truth to reconcile with the stories she'd heard and the simple narrative she'd come to accept. We should get the divorce finalized, Tom said finally, breaking the heavy silence. Officially, for closure. Sarah nodded, a small, sad gesture. It wasn't an admission of defeat, but a recognition that before any new beginning, they needed to formally end what had been built on a lie. The divorce, when it eventually happened, was amicable, a quiet legal formality. It focused not on fault, but on officially dissolving a marriage that had, in the essence, died 6 years prior, allowing both of them and Maggie to move forward. With Mark Thompson's legal proceedings underway, a quiet, almost hesitant sense of calm settled over Stone Ridge. The immediate scandal faded, replaced by the everyday hum of life. The topic of conversation shifted from Mark's betrayal to the usual town gossip, though everyone still carried the knowledge of what had transpired. Tom and Sarah began to tentatively rebuild a friendship. They'd meet for coffee at the diner, talking about the latest town council meeting, the unusually dry summer, or the school's upcoming football season. Their conversations were polite, a little formal, but beneath the surface, a fragile bridge was being extended. Maggie remained wary. She'd heard Tom's apology, seen the article, but the image of Sarah as the other woman was deeply ingrained. Still, she observed, she saw Sarah's genuine smile when she talked to Tom, the easy way she'd joke with him about something mundane, the kindness in her eyes. Sarah never pushed, never forced. One evening, Tom sat with Maggie on the porch swing. Maggie, he began, his voice soft. Sarah was wronged, just like David was wronged by sickness. Life isn't always fair, and sometimes bad people do bad things, and innocent people get hurt. He hoped to foster some empathy in her, to help her understand the nuanced pain Sarah had endured. Sarah, taking Tom's subtle cues, reached out to Maggie. She offered to help with homework one afternoon, quietly sitting beside her at the kitchen table, explaining math problems with a patient calm. She didn't pry, didn't push for emotional connection, just offered a steady, reliable presence. Slowly, Maggie's resistance began to chip away. She started asking questions, hesitant at first, then with more curiosity. "Were you happy together?" she asked one day, looking up from her history book. Sarah paused, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes, Maggie," she said, her voice gentle. "We were very happy for a long time." As Tom and Sarah spent more time together, a quiet, undeniable truth began to emerge. Despite the years, despite the pain, despite the separate lives they had built, they still cared deeply for each other. The old affection, buried under layers of hurt and misunderstanding, began to resurface. But the scars, both visible and unseen, ran deep. Carol Hayes watched her daughter, a renewed sense of hope blooming in her own heart. Sarah was different. Not just vindicated, but more open, a lightness in her step that hadn't been there for years. The guardedness that had defined her had begun to soften. Scott Miller, Tom's brother, had fully recovered from his accident, his limping gait a fading reminder of his past injury. He'd witnessed Tom's quiet struggle and was fully supportive of his brother's new path, whatever it might be. The Miller family construction business continued its success, bringing Tom more stability, more time for Maggie, and for the slow, careful process of rebuilding his own life. Sarah, though, found herself at a crossroads. The thought of leaving Stone Ridge for a fresh start, a new town where no one knew her past, had always been a quiet longing. But now her ties to her family, to her aging parents, to Emily, felt stronger than ever. And then there was Maggie, a growing tentative connection pulling at her heart. Tom, in the quiet solitude of his evenings, spent hours contemplating the moral consequences of his hasty judgment. He saw the price Sarah had paid for his lack of faith, the years stolen from her, the quiet despair she must have carried. He understood the profound weight of his mistake. Sarah, too, confronted her own past. The silence, the fear that had kept her from pursuing the divorce, from demanding answers, from even fighting for her own truth. She recognized that her own inaction, born of pain and shock, had also played a part in the long misunderstanding. She had allowed herself to be defined by his departure, rather than challenging the narrative. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, Maggie began to see Sarah not as a threat to her new family, not as the other woman who had hurt her daddy, but as a potential part of their family, a gentle, kind presence who made her laugh, who helped her with her homework, who looked at her father with an affection that felt strangely familiar. One cool autumn evening, as the first leaves fell, Tom and Sarah stood by her porch. The setting sun cast long shadows. The conversation had drifted from the trivial to the profound. He reached out, his hand gently touching her arm. Her skin tingled at his touch. They looked at each other, and in that shared glance, a moment of true vulnerability, they both admitted, without words, the love that had never fully died. It was a fragile thing, scarred and bruised, but it was still there, a faint flicker in the encroaching darkness. The flicker of love they had acknowledged on Sarah's porch grew, cautiously, into a tentative flame. Tom and Sarah began to explore the possibility of a romantic reconciliation, navigating the past hurts like a minefield. Every conversation held a hidden depth, every touch a question. They moved slowly, respectfully, aware of the delicate balance. Maggie, however, remained a crucial, vulnerable part of the equation. One afternoon, while baking cookies with Tom, her small hands mixing dough, she voiced her anxieties. "What if you find a new mom?" she asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't want a new mom. Not after Mama and David." The losses she had already endured, the fear of another replacement, weighed heavily on her. Sarah, overhearing from the doorway, knelt beside her. "Maggie," she said, her voice soft and reassuring, "I would never try to replace your mom or David. They'll always be your parents. But I would like to be a loving presence in your life, if you'd let me. Someone else who cares about you." She spoke with a genuine warmth, her eyes meeting Maggie's. Tom, witnessing the exchange, proposed a structured approach. "We'll spend time together, all three of us, as a family unit. No pressure, just getting to know each other." They started with simple things, trips to the local park, movie nights at Tom's house, even helping with chores around Sarah's place. The first family outings were awkward, filled with stilted conversation and self-conscious laughter. But gradually, a comfortable routine began to emerge, a rhythm of shared moments and easy companionship. Sarah's job as a freelance graphic designer allowed her the flexibility to integrate into Tom and Maggie's life without disrupting their established patterns. She could work from home, adjusting her schedule to accommodate school pickups, dinner preparations, or unexpected soccer practices. Carol and Emily, observing from a respectful distance, offered their quiet support. They saw the genuine effort Tom and Sarah were making, the cautious steps toward rebuilding not just a relationship, but a family. There was no fanfare, no grand pronouncements, just the steady, often difficult work of mending. One evening, after Maggie was asleep, Tom and Sarah sat on his porch swing, the crickets providing a natural soundtrack. "Sarah," Tom began, his voice low, filled with solemn sincerity, "I promise you, no more secrets, no more assumptions. I will always seek the truth, and I will always communicate, openly and honestly, with you, no matter what." It was a profound commitment, born of bitter experience, a vow to never repeat the mistakes of the past. Sarah, in turn, embraced Maggie's unique relationship with Tom. She celebrated their bond, the way Maggie would confide in her father, the easy affection between them. She understood that her role wasn't to compete, but to complement, to add another layer of love and support to their already strong foundation. They discussed the future carefully. Living arrangements. Should Sarah move into Tom's house, or would they find a new home together? Potential remarriage. Was that even a possibility? Or was a life partnership enough? Blending their lives, their pasts, their hopes for what was to come. These conversations were not always easy, but they were honest. One afternoon, as Sarah was helping Maggie with a complicated art project, Maggie looked up, a small smile playing on her lips. "Thanks, Aunt Sarah," she said almost shyly. The words hung in the air, a small yet significant compromise. Not Mom, not yet, but Aunt Sarah signified acceptance. A growing bond, a bridge crossed. Tom, watching the two of them from the kitchen doorway, understood then the true meaning of family. It wasn't just blood, not just shared genes or legal documents. It was shared love, commitment, the messy, beautiful work of showing up for each other, day after day. Sarah, too, found a deep sense of peace. The full story was known, her name cleared. The weight of false accusations had finally lifted, allowing her to breathe freely again. She had faced her past, understood her part in the silence, and was ready to move forward. The community, always observant, watched their slow, steady progress. It was a testament to resilience, to forgiveness, to the quiet power of two people choosing to rebuild. Tom and Sarah, facing the remaining moral consequences of their actions and inactions, learned to forgive themselves and each other, not for forgetting, but for choosing to heal. The decision, when it finally came, was quiet and considered, much like their renewed love. Tom and Sarah decided to remarry. It wasn't an obligation to erase a past mistake, but a deliberate choice born of a deeper, hard-won understanding. They knew the cost of trust, the value of honesty, and the enduring strength of a love that had survived years of deception. Maggie was a key part of the ceremony. Dressed in a simple white dress, she walked down the short aisle with a basket of wildflowers, her smile shy but genuine. She stood between Tom and Sarah as they exchanged vows, her small hand clutching each of theirs. It wasn't just a symbol, it was her acceptance, her active role in the forging of this new family. The wedding was a small, intimate affair. Held in the backyard of Tom's mother's house, beneath the shade of an old oak tree, it reflected their grounded Midwestern values. Close family and a few dear friends witnessed the vows. There were no grand gestures, just sincere promises made under the vast open sky, the scent of blooming lilacs heavy in the air. Meanwhile, a few weeks prior, Mark Thompson had received his sentence, a term in state prison, along with restitution for the emotional distress and professional damage he'd caused. The news, reported briefly in the Stone Ridge Sentinel, brought a definitive, if somber, closure to that painful chapter. Justice, in its slow, methodical way, had been served. Tom and Sarah, now united in purpose, began making plans for the future of Miller& Son Construction. Their focus shifted from mere profit to a stronger emphasis on community projects, on integrity in every nail and beam. Tom wanted to build more than structures. He wanted to rebuild trust. Maggie thrived in her new, stable family environment. The anxieties that had once shadowed her young life began to recede, replaced by a quiet confidence. Her athleticism, nurtured by Tom and cheered on by Sarah, led to local recognition in junior league soccer. She was a valued member of a team, and more importantly, of a family. Sarah, cleared of the false accusations, found her voice. She began volunteering at the local women's center, speaking about the importance of truth and open communication in relationships, sharing her story not as a victim, but as someone who had learned the hard lessons of silence and betrayal. Her words resonated, offering comfort and inspiration to others. Carol Hayes, her initial harsh judgments long since repented, became a doting grandmother figure to Maggie. She baked her favorite cookies, told her stories of Stone Ridge history, and offered a steady, unconditional love that bridged any lingering awkwardness. Emily, inspired by the lessons of uncovering truth, continued her journalism career. Her resolve strengthened, her instincts honed. She understood the power of a story, both to harm and to heal. One quiet evening, Tom sat with Maggie, looking through an old photo album. He stopped on a picture of David, young and smiling. "He would be so proud of you, Maggie," Tom said, his voice soft, "and I'm so grateful he entrusted you to me." It was a profound expression of gratitude to David, an affirmation of his own role as a father, a bond strengthened by love, not just blood. Together, the family cultivated a garden in the backyard of their shared home. Tomatoes, peppers, rows of corn. It was more than just a source of fresh vegetables. It was a metaphor for their growth, their patience, their belief in nurturing life from the ground up. Each weed pulled, each seed planted, was an act of hope. Sarah often reflected on their hard-won happiness. She knew the bitter price of betrayal, the quiet agony of false accusation. But she also knew the profound strength of forgiveness, both given and received. Their life in Stone Ridge, though not perfect, settled into a rhythm of enduring love and quiet contentment. The past was not forgotten. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the lessons learned. But it had shaped them, forged them into stronger, more compassionate individuals. Life, though still imperfect, was full of quiet hope and the profound satisfaction of a family reunited, rebuilt, and ready for whatever the unfolding horizon might bring.